Hello and welcome to the Legal Insider. I'm Dave Draper, your host, a practicing attorney here in Grosse Pointe, and I want to thank you for watching WMTV5 and the Legal Insider. Today we're going to have a guest on that we've seen before, Dave Hammel from Godfrey Hammel, who's going to talk to us about fraud and things you want to think about with your business, maybe even a small business, which really are the important targets out there, not necessarily the big businesses, but what you want to look out for and make sure that you're going to keep track of all the money in your business and that it's not going out the door or out the window. Dave, thank you so much for coming on today.
My pleasure, David. My pleasure.
Well, you've had an interesting path over the last few years, many years, kind of seeing the trends and what's going on in corporate fraud. Is that fair?
Yes, there actually has been quite an explosion, really, with fraud and embezzlement.
Computers and the economy and all kinds of reasons.
Yeah, it's been a combination of all kinds of things where most companies, truly, there is some form of fraud that is occurring in their businesses and they don't even know it.
Sure.
And it can be range from an improper expense report to somebody, a restaurant, sending the goods and products right out the back door.
Sure.
So there is a lot of pressure, especially in today's economy, where
we need to tighten up and find those
right,
dollars, right?
Right. There are statistics that are out there that are, in some worlds, kind of troublesome to think that this type of situation has occurred, and I think it's been heightened ever since Enron's debacle happened years ago. That people have really taken a look at this.
Yeah, don't take it at face value, because they were putting out these glowing reports, right? And that things are, the future's great, the present's great, and look at us, we're gangbusters. And if anybody, but it was all fraudulent. I mean, truly, the setups, the scams, they couldn't support themselves, and they weren't real.
Right.
And if somebody would have really, and finally they did, some journalists and some other folks and some investors or people that got scammed looked into it and said, hey, wait a sec.
Right. It really became. And that's the large
wake-up call for the country,
right,
so to speak.
Yeah, and in fact, it really was a wake-up call where you could go. It became more of, instead of just a civil crime, it became a criminal crime. Literally, you could go to court and say, that person killed my 401k plan. I mean,
and I want retribution, and this person should be punished, and people were punished.
Yeah, exactly.
And are being punished,
Exactly. But, the statistics are there, and I had brought you some where, as it says, the typical organization loses about 5% of their revenues to fraud. And when you think about that, just $1 million in sales would be, $50,000 that somebody is taking from your company. And in my world, I usually show up more as a reactive as opposed to proactive. And
they've found, okay, there's a problem, somebody stole this money. What are we going to do? How much did they really steal? We don't know.
Right.
And you're going to help them find that out,
right? And statistically, when they do find out, that fraud has been occurring for, statistically they say 18 months that it's been going on.
Yeah, so you're not going to find it in the first month, the average, right? You're not going to find it in the first time they go online and bank. So things don't quite add up, or maybe they do because the person committing the fraud is the one that's watching the books, right?
Usually that's the case, and that's where, like I said, it's been prolonging for a while until somebody catches wind that something isn't right. By that time, it's usually too late. When I come in, it's usually attempting to quantify what had taken place.
What's the max, or what's the total amount that this person stole, or this group stole?
Right.
And are you also in a role of try to get it back or try to correct the ship?
Well, most of the time, the people have already spent the money. I mean, it truly comes down to that. And where we're going with this is that at times, if that person had stolen from you, it was difficult to get any kind of criminal sanctions against them. It was more if there was some kind of employee dishonesty, or the insurance companies would cover some form of retribution, so to speak, to getting the money back. The money was taken, stolen, and basically the company was out of luck as far as collecting that money.
And that's the reality, right? Is most times that money's gone and you're not going to get it back and kiss it goodbye, but hope it doesn't happen again.
Right, and again,
And put in safeguards so it doesn't happen again, I presume.
that's where it's really the key. If you can be a little more proactive and think about putting in checks and balances where you don't have your employee give them the opportunity of taking the money. You're more at risk with much smaller companies because they don't have good internal controls. You may have a one-man band that does everything for you.
Accounts payable, accounts receivable.
Right, but the perfect example with that, which I say to small businessmen, is have the bank statement sent at home. And I don't care if you really look at it, but that person who's in that trust of your accounting department that writes checks or whatever knows that that bank statement goes at home. You may open it up, look at the checks, maybe not, but at least that's a little bit of internal control there.
Yeah, it's a deterrent that, okay, I can't just, because if that employee's just getting the statements and can destroy them or
right, they can
alter
pull
them
that
or
check
whatever.
out or
Yeah.
do whatever. And again, people do it for opportunity or there's a need that you're
Yeah, do
unaware
you
of.
see a constant or a theme of who is this fraud perpetrator, or do you see just a wide variety of?
Well, in the smaller ones, it's usually if there's an opportunity, there's a need. Usually, once I determine that that the fraud has been committed, I'll speak to that individual. It's usually the same old, I promised to pay it back.
Right.
I needed the money, you know, that type of thing. And
Do you beat the confessions out of them?
really don't have to.
Right. Because it's probably weighing on their conscience.
Yes,
Right?
they almost feel somewhat relieved. The question comes down to, as far as the company goes, what do I do?
Right.
Do I just let that individual go? Do I seek either civil or criminal? Some will go criminal. Surprisingly, there's a lot of people that'll say, well, I'll move that person out of the accounting department. And I'll say, well, they've already committed a crime. I mean, I don't want to say make an example, but there is no definition on stealing, whether it's a pencil or $100,000. Stealing is stealing. And again, though that person had taken it, you should, you know, react to it and react, not say harshly, but you should automatically let that person go.
Yeah, you don't need that in your corporate culture, your business, even a very small business, right? Because you've already got a bad track record. They've already shown you their character or what type of person they are.
Right.
You should listen to that.
But most companies, if they kind of take a step back, they can design and build an internal control situation where it makes deterrence, or you know, the separation of duties, let's say, in those type of positions where you change things up, and that's more of that fraud preventative thing. But statistics, frankly, they just don't lie. I mean, the average theft in the United States is $160,000 per theft in small businesses, and at first
When they find what that person's done over time,
yes,
that's the average.
That's the average. But I've been involved where people have taken the key employee in the accounting department has taken over $2.4 million, and so people are somewhat clever at times on how they go about taking money or misappropriating funds from the entity, and some are Chapter 3 on how to steal and cheat. I mean, it's so textbook.
Yeah.
It's so simple, you know, in some ways.
And like you say, so simple and could have been prevented had they had these safeguards in place, or just somebody else, another person, an independent person, to take a look at the books or whatever that might be.
Right, and that's really the key. I mean,
are you ever called in and you find that really nothing's happened here, that maybe it's sloppy management, but somebody says, I'm sure they're